Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a blessing to be here. It's a blessing to be here on Veterans Day and lifting up our veterans for what they've done for us, serving our country so that we can have the freedoms that we have. And so what I'm going to do now is I just want to take a time to ask if there's anyone here that's ever served in our forces, in our military, of any sort of military. I'm going to ask them if they would just please stand. Everybody give these guys a round of applause. These guys, I'm not sure how many seen war or what have you, but these guys were willing to sign their name, put their lives on the line, just so that we can have freedom to do what we're doing here this morning. And we thank each and every one of you. And we're really glad to see that you're still here. That's even better. I praise God and thank God for all of you. But we have another veteran, one that we hear about, but we don't think of him as a veteran. But he's also a veteran. If you will, turn with me to Samuel, 1 Samuel, chapter 17. This veteran is David. David was a good-looking man, as they say. Very much a man after God's own heart. He was a brave young man. And David is fixing to go into war. You see, the Philistines are holding arms up and ready to go against Israel. And Israel's ready to fight back. But they have one little problem. Or should I say, a big problem. And that big problem is, there's a man that stands about 9'5". He's wearing about 125 pounds of armor on him. He's got a shield, a spear, and he is ready to fight. And he's big. And I just want to share this story with you this morning because I want you to see some things in here in this story that is real significant. See, David has his own battle going on, but we also have our own battles going on. And through this story, I believe that God shows us how we can deal with those battles and how to confront these battles. So let's go to chapter 17. Chapter 17, 1 Samuel, starting in the first verse. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle and were gathered at Sukkah, which belongs to Judah. They encamped between Sukkah and Ezekiah and Ephes Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. Now you can imagine, here we are, we got one group on one side and one group on the other side. We got God's chosen people on one side, and we got the Philistines on the other side. And see, they're fixing to go to battle. They got their arms up, they're ready to go, and then, listen to what happens. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, from Gath, whose weight was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And he had bronze armor on his legs, and bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. and a shield bearer went before him. And we're talking about a spearhead of 35 pounds. If you wanted to take a sledgehammer and hold it in your hand, one of those long ones, and hold it out like this, I guarantee you most of us here couldn't do that. But this thing was way more than a sledgehammer. It was very heavy. This was a huge man. You see, this was a problem for Israel, because Israel had nobody that wanted to go up against him. Listen as we move forward. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servant of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us." And the Philistine said, "I defy the armies of Israel. This day give me a man that we may fight together." You see, they had a problem, a huge problem. And every one of them was afraid. They was all scared. And so we have that today going on in our own lives. We might not have a man that stands 9'5" and ready to fight, but we got our own Goliaths in our life. If you think about cancer, our sickness, things that keep us down. You see, those things begin to bring worry about our hearts. They make us even scared. And then sometimes we're just like those, like the Israelites. We're just sitting here shaking in fear because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going on. We don't know what's in the future. Well, all we know is this just bad. I know there was a time whenever I had one of my children who had, as my oldest child, he got out on drugs. And he went and he started living a reckless life. And it was extremely reckless. It's things you wouldn't even think of. And there was time when I even felt like, God, where were you at this time? What's going on? Because see, these things are, when they come a certain age, teenagers, they're not in your hands anymore. And there's nothing you can do with them. You can talk and you can try to beat it into them, but you can't get teenagers to do what you want them to do. Even if you yell, scream, and go break the switch off and swipe them, especially at the age of 17 and 18 years old and 16. You see, yeah, you kids laugh. My parents beat me with a switch real good. They keep me straight most of the time. But you see, we went through that, and there was times where I didn't even know if we were going to make it through. To see a kid just flush his own life down the toilet is draining of the heart. It hurts. It's not easy. And then you watch your wife just sink down into depression because she can't understand what she did wrong. When all that, she didn't do nothing wrong. The only thing of it is, the devil brought something to the family that shouldn't even been there. You see, and that's what's happened here. See, Israel is God's chosen people. But the devil wants to stand in the way. So he puts the biggest and the worst thing that you could possibly put in. And that is a giant that is ready to eat you alive. It's just like when we allow drugs and alcohol ramp into our homes. Even when we don't want it coming into our homes, it comes in our homes. See, it can do the very same thing Goliath was fixing to do. It can tear a family apart. It can eat you alive. It can eat you on the inside. You can not have no part or take no part in no kind of drug like that right there, but it can still destroy you if you let it. Some of us, we have financial Goliaths in our life. And some of our things could even be our marriages, where we think that there's no hope. Because all we want to do is we want to see change in our families. We want to see change in our husband or our wife. It can become our Goliath. And a lot of people could probably shake it off and say, hey, you know, it's not as big as a deal as you think of it, but it might not be their Goliath, but it still is your Goliath, and it still is in your marriage. But let me tell you, there is something in behind that Goliath. And his name is Satan, the devil. He will put Goliaths in your life. Especially when it comes to things you can't even help, like cancer, sicknesses, Sometimes these things come about because of sin into the world. And we can't help it. We have no control over it. You see, Israel had no control over what man was stepping out for the Philistines. Because it's a big man who steps out. And I want you to notice something in this verse here. In verse 11, when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistines, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Fear sets in. That's one of the devil's number one priorities, is to put fear in your heart. To put fear in your life, to get you thinking wrong. And you'll find out over in verse 24 whenever it says, and all the men of Israel were, when they saw the man, and fled from him, and were deathly afraid. And even you find Saul later on talking to David and telling him, there ain't no way you could do this. There ain't no way that you could stand against the Philistine, especially a man of this size and magnitude. But I want you to follow with me along as we go through this story, because I want you to really see how to beat your life. I want you to be able to walk out here today and be able to say, I know how to take care of this anxiety that's been beating me down, this depression that's been beating me down. I want you to see how to move forward. Now listen. Verse 12. Now David was a son of that Ephratite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse, and who had 8 sons, and the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 older sons of Jesse had gone to follow Saul to the battle. The names of his 3 sons who went to battle were Eli, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shimei. David was the youngest, and of the 3 oldest followed Saul. But David occasionally went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. 40 days the Philistine Goliath had stood and said, come, give me a man that will fight me. For 40 days. You see, some of our Goliaths can last for a long time. It could be days, it could be weeks. In my case with my own son, it lasted for 2 years. Our Goliaths can last for a long time. And if we allow the devil to run rampant in our lives, it can last as long as we're going to allow it. But you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. I want you to listen to this. Then Jesse said to his son, David, take now for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp, and carry these 10 cheeses to the captain and their 1,000, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Eli, fighting with the Philistines. So David rose early in the morning, left the sheep and with a keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle. Now you can imagine these guys were going out and they were shouting. They was going out, they was ready to fight, even though that for 40 days this guy's been saying, bring me somebody. And this is something I never could understand in the stories where they would come charging out like, ready to fight. And this guy steps out for the first time. They're like, whoa, 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 whoa. And they get all afraid. And then again, he steps out again. And they're ready to charge again. And this guy steps out again. And they start backing up. You see, it doesn't make no sense to me, because if I had a guy that was stepping up to me, I'd be willing to go find somebody else to do this thing instead of keep on chanting. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army, and David left his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, and come and greeted his brothers. Then as he talked with them, there was a champion, the Philistine of God, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. And he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, "Have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel." Now, you can imagine what's happening. David's went to the front lines. He's went to see his brothers. And all of a sudden, they're talking about this man because they're all in dismay. They don't know what's going to happen. And they're worried, and they're thinking, who's going to do this? Who's going to step up to the bat? You see, this is Israel, God's chosen people. But it seems as though they have forgotten who God is for a moment. They have realized that their life is so big that they hadn't realized that God's way bigger than our life. You see, they think their problem is big and God is too small. I'm here to tell you today that there is nothing that is bigger than God. Nothing bigger than God. It doesn't matter what you're going through, what you've been through, some of the things that may come in your life that you know that's coming, something you may be expecting. Just understand, before you get into anxiety, before you get worked up, you need to understand something I've learned this week, that there is a God and He is greater than anything you could go through. You just got to put your faith and trust in Him. That's all. But I'm going to show you something right here in the story that's really amazing me. And I kind of think of David here. They say he's a small man. He's not as big. He's just a keeper of sheep. But you ever seen those little guys that they seem like real little, but they're ready to scrap anybody? I mean, they seem like they ain't but about 4'6", 4'7", and their chest is out, and their ego's big. I don't know if you ever heard of Scrappy-Doo out of Scooby-Doo. But it's almost like you're getting ready to see Scrappy-Doo here in David, just for a moment. But it ain't because he thinks he's big. I'm going to show you this morning who David thinks big other than himself. Listen to this. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, "What shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" See, he's not saying that who is this man? Well, we're afraid. What are we going to do? He's saying, who is this man? Who is this man that thinks he's going to stand against God? You see something David had that nobody else had on their mind, which is the fact that God is on our side. He's always been on our side, and He's willing to fight on our side if we're allowed and to let Him to fight on our side. You see, we forget God when our lives get too big, when our problems get too big, and we forget that all we got to do is give those things to God, and God will help us handle those things. Now, don't think that we can give them to God and we're not going to have to go through anything. Sometimes we have to go through them, but we know that God's on our side. He goes before us, He goes behind us, and He walks beside us. I want you to listen to what happens. And the people answered him in this manner, saying, "So shall it be done for the man who kills him." Now I want you to listen right here. Now his brother, now Eli, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eli's anger was aroused against David. And he said, "Why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. Now, I want you to understand something. This guy's like, what are you even doing here? Here David is, he's talking about God, how God's on our side, and he's already speaking him down. You know, there's negative people going to be in your life, even when you're going through trials. There's people that's going to give you all the bad things, but they never give you the good stuff. If you don't believe me, you can read the book of Job. He had some fellows come to him, giving him some bad, even his own wife said, curse God and die. And that happens all the time. As a matter of fact, if you sit around and done less talking and we do a whole lot more listening, you might find out there's a whole lot of people that does a whole lot of talking about things they don't even know what they're talking about. And the thing of it is, when you're going through a trial, when you're going through things, something you can't help, when you're facing your Goliath, there's always going to be negative people. You see, the devil don't always just send the Goliath, but he always sends other people along to discourage you when you're facing your Goliath. And it's happened in my life as well. And it happens in many people's lives. Now listen to this. Now when the words which, let's back up here. 29. And David said, what have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul. And he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. And Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth. You see, this happens a lot in life. You see, David's like, I'll do this. I'll take this man. But what happens again? His brother discourages him, and then Saul says, come on. You got to be kidding me. You're a young man. You're just a shepherd. You're a young man. You're very small. And this guy here, he's been fighting since he was in diapers. But listen to what David says. But David said, Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear come and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it, and I struck it, and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, and I struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. So what has happened here? What has David done? David has brought back the past victories of what God's brought him through. And see, when we're facing each Goliath, when we're facing each problem that we have in life, what we tend to do is forget about the victories we had before. But if we be more like David, and we start going back to our past and looking at the victories of what God's brought us through, and we bring them up to where we're at today with the lives that we're facing today, maybe that will encourage us just from our past to know that we can go to the next hurdle, that we can beat the next Goliath. But what it's going to take is going to go back to knowing what God done, what He has done, believing in what God has done, and what He will do, and knowing that God's going to help us through the rest of it. You see, God's always with us. He always has been. He's never left us. Now, there may be times it seems like He has drifted away from us. But if you look really closely, you might find out you drifted away from Him. Because as you see, Israel has drifted from that because of their fear. David is still with God. He's still with God. That's why you see that little bitty guy in that scrappy-do mode. Not because of who he is, but because of who God is in him. That's what we need to focus on. We need to focus on that God is with us, that he always has been with us. The Bible says he will never leave us nor forsake us. Isn't it good to know that whenever you're going through something, that you have God on your side? Let's see what else we got going on here in this verse, these verses. So he's pretty much said, you know, God has helped me through killing a lion. And I'm going to tell you something. Anybody that can take a lion by the mane is not just no little man. He's a big man. In my book, even if it is small, he's a big man. Because I'm going to tell you, if I had a lion coming at me, they can have my sheep, they can have my goats, I'm running. Just saying. Just saying. This young man, he has no fear. How we be feared? We call on God. How we be feared? We call on God. You get it? Are you getting it? Anytime we're going through something hard, we call on God. We call on God. But not only do we call on him, but we believe that he's going to show up. Because if we don't believe that he's going to show up, then we fall into fear again. And the devil wins. Let's finish the story out here. Let's look and see what God has for us in the rest of the story. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, first of all, he's given all the glory to God, not himself. He's not saying, look what I have done. He's looking and saying, look what God has done. The paw of the lion, and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord will be with you. He didn't just say, look what God has done. He said, look what God's going to do before it even happens. That's the kind of faith that David had. This man can walk through fire, and he knows God's on his side. I remember a while back when our brother Don, he got, I think it was a seizure up or something that happened to him, a stroke, that's what it was, thank you. He had a stroke, and you know, the whole time that he went through those times, we know that God was on his side. Because he's walking, he's talking, he's riding. I mean, things is getting pretty much back to normal. But we know that God's on his side. I've seen that's a Goliath in his life, and I've seen God step into his life. I know some of us had cancer, and God has healed us from it. That's a Goliath. And God stepped in. All the marbles that you see here, that's where God has stepped in and tore down the Goliath in our lives. It's because we have faith in God. We have faith in God. I want you to follow along here. So Saul clothed David with his armor and put a bronze helmet on him. No, watch this. On his head, he also clothed him with a coat of mail. David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. You got so many people can give advice on how to tackle your Goliath. But if we go back to God and let God take care of this and quit worrying about other people's advice, we might find out that these people could be wrong with God is right in His Word and what He says. A lot of people want to give advice, especially those that ain't never been through it. If we put our focus on God,
This is the main part of this message, is when we have God on our side, we can conquer. We can conquer. So here it is, he's trying again to give him all the stuff he can possibly give him so he can make it through this. And Saul's thinking he needs all that he can get before we send him out. But David knows what he needs. He needs God. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from a brook and put them in the shepherd's bag, in a pouch which he had. And his sling was in his hand. And he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. And when the Philistine had looked about and saw David, he disdained him. David disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, I am a dog, that you come to me with sticks. And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds, and of the air, and of the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord our host, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. What's happened here? What has David said? You come to me with all that armor. You come to me and you sling as much as you can. But I come to you with a host of heaven. I come to you and I bear God on my side. You know, when the devil throws these things in front of us, when he puts these worries and these fears in our heart, all we got to do is throw back God in his face. And when you go to throwing Jesus' name around too much, that devil goes to scurrying away. And you see, this is what David's done. I think there's a little trash talking going on there a little bit. It's not really trash talk. It's David's serious, and this guy's doing the trash talking. In verse 47, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with a sword or a spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into your hands. So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slang it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So what did David do? David ran toward him. No fear. He didn't ask God to take him away from the situation, but he allowed God to take him through the situation. You see, a lot of people want to run from their problems. They want to run from their fears. But David ran right through it. He ran right through it. I want to leave you with this one thing this morning. No matter how big your problems are, no matter how big your fears are, no matter how big your anxieties are, God's big enough to walk you through them. He's big enough to help you through them. You see, David done one of the greatest things. Not kill a giant. But he showed that God's always on his side. And by doing that, he claimed victory. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor in my book. We all need to become more like David's. And these men that stood up in here this morning, I count them as the Davids of this day and time. Men that are willing to stand. And I'm sure as these men that stood, and as I know them pretty well, that I've known them throughout the years here at Konnoak, I know they had God on their side whenever they stepped into that military uniform. And we thank them. We thank God for the message that He's given us as the musicians come to play.